Marcia Kavanaugh, thanks so much for joining us. We don't know all who will be running for governor next year, but we know one person who will not be. Senator John Kennedy has announced his decision to stay out of the race, and it is significant. We'll examine why. The sale of Tipitinas this week to a local funk band also had its significance, not only for the music club scene, but for the financial troubles of a local businessman. We'll take a look at that, as well as softening prices for high-end real estate and new plans for Jefferson Parish parades. We will also examine allegations of missing employees who might have been responsible for the Sewerage and Water Board's latest boil water order. At the well for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Richard Thompson, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate, and David Hammer, investigative reporter, WWL-TV Channel 4. I'm going to go first over to Errol because today there was also the release by the Jesuits of some names of priests with credible accusations of child abuse.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, the Archdiocese released a list, and what happened today is that the Jesuit Central Order, which covers central United States and the South and a little bit into the Caribbean, it released a list of what he called religious who were credibly accused of sexual abuse. And this is over really, some of them go back into the 1950s. It is not as long as of a list as the one from the Archdiocese. In fact, there were 42 names on the list. 19 of those 42 had at some point been involved in New Orleans. It might have been minimal, or it might have been just passing through, staying in a parish for a while, or it may have been being really involved. I think what's important is not who is on the list, is that who's not on the list, because the Jesuit community's been around a lot. A lot of people have been educated by the Jesuits. A lot of people know Jesuits that they went to school with and remembered it. And there are some Jesuits who were beloved in the community. And if by now their names hasn't appeared on those two lists, that's probably a good sign. And I think there's a certain amount of relief. I know some people were expressing concern about Father so-and-so and Father so-and-so. And if they didn't show up, at least at that point, they've kind of passed muster as far as that test. We don't know if there's going to be any more, but it was, I guess it was a big step towards kind of clearing the situation. And it did include some people, most of them really weren't involved with New Orleans, who were other than priests. It may have been brothers or nuns or people who were teachers.
Yeah, teachers or scholastics. Now, some of those on today's list, the Jesuit list, had also been on.
Yeah, there were a few. Right? And so a few, and those were probably the bigger names, and those were really no surprise at all because they had been there already.
As you said, it's a step in this really sorry situation that we see unfolding. It seems like just consistently we're learning more about it.
Yeah, in Jesuit school, the principal has been almost on a daily basis been sending out emails to people just saying the list is coming. You might be surprised about the list, and has really been commenting on it as it's going along.
Okay,
the thing that's interesting about it is that there's not a lot of revelations on these lists. It's things that the people at least in those communities have known about for a while. I went and tried to speak to a priest when the first list came out who had been identified, and people in the community thought that he had been exonerated. But this brought that back up again, and he had fought against the allegations at the time, and he slammed the door in my face when I tried to talk to him.
So, I mean, like Errol said, I mean, we're finding out more, but we're also learning and finding out more that there's a whole lot more that we don't know and need to know.
Right.
Okay. Right. All right, Errol, we're going to stick with you right now. A list of a different sort is the list of names who are going to be seeking the governorship of Louisiana.
And the big name on the list, the one that made the most difference in terms of who might win, is Senator John Kennedy, who had been a rumored candidate and who was in speculation that if he ran, he'd be the most likely winner, that he would unseat the incumbent. He's very popular in Louisiana, and he announced Monday that he will not. And if you think about it, being a senator is a good gig. First of all, it's 6-year terms. They're unlimited. And so, whereas the governor's 4-year terms, and they are limited, you're limited to 2 terms. Now, some people, they just want to be governor no matter what. But as Kennedy said, he loves being a senator, especially when his party is in the majority. He's on the Judicial Committee. And plus, he's getting a lot of publicity just with his folksy style and his witticisms. But there is some intelligence behind that also. So I think he's finding his place in Washington. So where do you go now? I mean, the Republicans will find somebody. That's Congressman Abraham from Monroe. Yet another Republican congressman who's a doctor. His case, he started off as a veterinarian and then went to medical school and became a family doctor. And then a businessman out of Baton Rouge called Eddie Raspone, who's an industrial contractor who's already committed $5 million to his campaign. So we know that there's 2 Republicans that'll be in there. And, with Kennedy not in it, that's going to probably open the field a little bit. Had Kennedy gotten in, it'd probably been a lot smaller race.
State Senator Sharon Hewitt is a name that's out there also potentially going to be making an announcement about it. She's indicated maybe some interest.
Yeah, but I think once people go and they start talking about the money and see what's out there, that's going to be a big factor. And I wouldn't count out John Bell Edwards either. I know it's very rare they have a Democrat in Louisiana, and he won kind of because of unusual circumstances. But I think he's maintained a certain amount of popularity. I don't think people dislike him, and so.
Don't you think that part of the calculations from a lot of these Republicans not to run is that he is actually very popular, and they think that they might not be able to beat him?
I don't think he's very popular, but I think he's electable in the right circumstances. The other thing is that he's running for his second and final term. And so if he sits out, then 4 years from now, it's going to be wide open again. So I think a lot of people who want to be governor might be calculating, let's wait until we don't have an incumbent to run against.
Well, definitely the national press really do like Senator Kennedy because, like you said, they're always going to get a good quote out of him.
Yeah, right.
That's for sure. So, okay, well, we're just getting started with the governor's race. We'll be hearing more
But this
about
was a big step this week, though. I mean, when you write the history
it is. That
of the
was...
governor's race, Kennedy saying no was a big moment in it.
Yeah, well, I mean, he definitely made us wait for it, didn't he?
Yeah, right.
Okay. All righty, David, over to you right now. And latest now in the Irvin Mayfield and his partner, Markham.
Right.
Yeah, what's Mr. Markham's first name?
Ronald.
Ronald Markham.
Yes.
Now, this is something that you broke, how long ago? 2.5 years?
2015,
Yeah.
May of 2015, and I can't even count how many stories I did since 2015 and into 2016. And some of the stuff that I laid out in those stories was now included in the second superseding indictment. This is now, so what that means is they indicted him in December 2017, I should say, both of them were indicted. Then they followed up earlier this year with 4 additional counts. And then this time they've added an additional count against Markham, who is accused of lying to the FBI about a cover-up or changing of board minutes to kind of cover up some of the transfers of the money. This goes back to, again, is a transfer of more than $1 million in library donations that was given by the public to the public library system through a foundation, the Library Foundation, and moving it over to their jazz orchestra. That was the orchestra that Mayfield founded and Markham ran as the president. And so they are accused of that scheme, and initially when I did those stories in 2015, they said, oh no, all the money went into building this New Orleans jazz market on Aretha Castle Haley Boulevard, and the indictment lays out pretty clearly how that money actually went to pad their own pockets, their salaries, and to cover up for major losses of revenue and money in their jazz orchestra accounts, and so their operating of the jazz orchestra.
So the superseding indictment does not add any charges other than that one for Markham.
It doesn't, well, and charges is a difficult term. It doesn't add any additional counts other than that one, which is it's not obstruction of justice, but it's essentially false statements is actually the name of the count. But what it does is it adds overt acts to a conspiracy charge that was already made. So some of those acts include this doctoring of the minutes, emails that were sent saying one thing when the truth was another. I had actually gotten through public records request emails that they sent to the head of the city's library system saying we don't have enough money to give you any more of these annual allowances, basically saying, yeah, we were created to support the city libraries, but that money we've been sending you all these years to support the city libraries, that's going to have to stop. We don't have enough. And I did that story about a year ago, and in this indictment, it lays out actually that very same email where he tells the library director we don't have it.
So what charges are they facing?
Well, there's conspiracy, there's wire fraud, there's money laundering, there's obstruction of justice, and now this lying to the FBI.
And this is going to trial?
It was going to trial in May. It's set in May. It's been pushed back. It was originally set for October of this year. It got pushed back. I would suspect people that I speak to say that now giving another charge could be cause to delay it yet again, and we'll just have to see. But it's interesting that they're kind of doling this out piecemeal over time. I spoke to Sarah Johnson, who's Markham's attorney, who said that she felt that that was artificial to keep it in the news rather than just charging what they have, because she felt that these were charges that they were well aware of and issues they were well aware of from the beginning.
Remember that this story broke right after voters had just approved a bond issue to support the library, which is very unusual.
Well, it broke at that time because we made a decision.
You all delayed it. Yeah, you delayed it.
Before the thing, and the reason we did that is to make it clear to people that this is money that's made donations from the public, rather than the money that they are paid in taxes to support the city library system, which is what that vote was about.
But that was the first time that voters had agreed to tax themselves since Katrina.
Right.
Okay. And so it was a significant election. It was a great moment for the library.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden,
and then boom, and the bottom falls out. Well, and you've got to separate in your mind those two things, particularly because this Library Foundation board, which had always been exactly the same people as that were on the library system board, had just recently, and it's really a part of this whole thing, become a separate entity with people who were not carryovers from the library board itself. So you can see how there's a distinction there, but it's still there to support the public library system.
Mayfield and Markham both maintain they've done nothing wrong.
Correct, exactly. They have pled not guilty. They will have to enter another plea now. They've entered not guilty pleas on the previous two indictments and would have to do so again here.
Okay, all right, David, thanks a lot. Over to Richard right now, and get over to you while you're lonesome over there. A couple of stories here regarding Tipitina's and the former owner of Tipitina's. Tipitina's has been sold by Roland von Kernatowski to the band Galactic. So, and this is in relation to a bigger story of individuals filing suit against von Kernatowski regarding investments, but also you did a piece about the Tipitina's Foundation. What did you find out about that?
Well, ultimately, it's been, I think you could say, a tough month for Mr. von Kernatowski. And what we found within the foundation was that for 15 years, the foundation has raised money to support musicians' causes, and has put instruments in with school bands and helped match job training and other support services. But in many cases, the business of the nonprofit was intertwined with his own business. What we found is, in recent weeks, he's faced a raft of allegations, both in civil and federal lawsuits, from people who are alleging that they had invested money with him, millions of dollars overall, and they tried to redeem that money, but for whatever reason, they were unable to get it from him. In one case, it's been alleged that he was running a Ponzi scheme, for instance. And so what we found naturally that has put more attention and more focus on his other businesses and his other operations, and that's what led us to looking at the foundation. And what we found was that in one longtime former board member had described it as though he's running the foundation, a nonprofit, almost like his business. We talked to two people who served for more than a decade on the board who said the board never met, they were never invited to meet, they never reviewed any financials, they were never asked to approve anything. And these are the safeguards that a nonprofit board needs to kind of play that fiduciary role to ensure that the money is being well spent.
And so is that, is that a usual thing for nonprofit boards? I mean, nonprofits are all individual organizations, I guess, with their own bylaws and articles of incorporation, et cetera. But is it usual for a board not to meet at all?
It's beyond the norm, for sure. I mean, it depends. It's all up to the nonprofit and its charter how often it meets, whether it's quarterly or once a year at the very least. So to have not met at all for more than a decade in some cases is very unusual.
You detailed some other transactions, some business transactions involving property in Shreveport.
There were a number of transactions, including in Shreveport. The foundation prior to 2012 was donated 3 buildings in downtown Shreveport, and the buildings were all in bad condition. And we found this through going through Tipitina's Foundation's financial statements for 2014 and 15. And so the 3 buildings were in bad shape, and they were donated by their previous owners who were just looking to have them brought back into commerce. And so what we saw in the years subsequent was that he acquired the 3 buildings. He took out loans against them in order to try to bring them back up. Some of the money from the loans he used to pay a construction company he owns to do the work, for work that had already been completed and work that was still to come. A few years later, he transferred the buildings to another LLC that he controlled from the foundation to a company on his own. He said that he would assume the loans on that LLC as well, but they still remained on the nonprofit's books. And for all the talk about these buildings being in bad shape and needing a lot of work and being a burden on the foundation, as he told us, in one case now, for more than a year, it's been transformed into a real high-demand, high-end loft apartment building, and it's with retail, and it's in an area of Shreveport that's really now up and coming.
Have you talked to him about the foundation issues at all?
We talked to him about both the foundation and also the allegations of financial mismanagement that have been lodged against him. In that case, he said it was a misunderstanding, that people would eventually be made whole, or they would be understanding of what had happened. And in this case, when we presented him with our findings, he sent us a statement that basically detailed that he's raised and donated millions of dollars to the foundation over the years, and that this, to some extent, was a misunderstanding as well, that the foundation would have an equity interest in these buildings. But of course, that was never detailed on the record, so it really remains to be seen.
And in addition to these problems, he's having these problems with his own private businesses. You know, he has that landing, lakefront landing thing that has really, I think, struggled. And he had the Orpheum, and he got out of that. And we had found out that he was having trouble paying bands, including Galactic, which ended up buying it from him. And I think people were very, very happy that a local funk band with their kind of, credo is going to be taking this over, because Tipitina's was founded as that for Professor Longhair in the 70s, and it's this cultural icon in New Orleans, and they felt like Von Kernatowski was losing it. You know?
Yeah, well, they want to see the music community, so certainly wants to see Tipitina's operate strongly.
Right, and the other thing that's interesting too about these buildings is that, so there's a board that's made up of him, his wife, representatives from Tipitina's, and a business partner of his, as well as these 2 business people that we spoke with that said that never met. But one member on that board, Dr. Eric George, who was his business partner in the Orpheum, he sold his interest back to him in October, was also an investor in these buildings that were transferred from the foundation to the private entity. And I think that raises some questions, too, that we don't have the answer to.
Well, Instruments Coming, which is the real focus of the Tipitina's Foundation, really has put a lot of instruments in the hands of kids around town.
Oh, there's no debate that it's done great work for the
Right.
community, and I think everybody's in agreement on that, but whether or not his own private business interest should be interceding with the nonprofit
Right.
is the bigger question.
Okay, all right. Thanks a lot, Richard. We're going to go back over to David, and we're starting to run kind of out of time, too.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to have to talk kind of tightly now.
Okay.
Our Sewage and Water Board. We've heard the new head of the Sewage and Water Board basically explain that a couple of the employees who were important employees during the last boil water event bailed out. What does that mean?
Well, we knew that there were a lot of problems. There were system failures along every step of the way that led to that boil water advisory on November 17th. But we didn't know that there were 2 people that they counted on after some of those failures had already happened to get one of the repairs in place and avoid the boil water advisory. Just simply did not do their job. Ghassan Corban, the new director, described it as they bailed. And then there were all these questions from the city council. Well, what do you mean? Did you mean that they were like in the bathroom and sick, or do you mean they left, or what happened?
Did they freak out?
Freak out, and he said they didn't freak out. They just chose not to engage. So we don't have the details of exactly what they did to fail to do their job, other than just not doing it. They needed to give a very crucial approval to put in a backup pump keep the pressure up in the water system, and because they weren't there, that didn't happen.
So they were supposed to basically, as I understand it, give the order
Right.
to turn on the pump.
But the people
they
who
just didn't do
could
it.
turn on the pump were there in place, ready to do it, and they needed their approval to do it, because they are not high-level managers, but they are managers, and and the chain of command worked that way, and they weren't there to do it, and they were physically there on site. They just did not give the approval when they needed to.
And with the timeline, does it appear if that approval had been given and the pump
Yes.
operated, then the boil
They
water
only needed-
advisory would have been, avoided?
They only needed about 7 more minutes of pumping time to be able to avoid it, and so that definitely would have given that to them.
What is the Sewerage and Water Board doing about this? And we rely on these people to operate the machinery.
Well, one of the things they said is that they've got a protocol. Well, first of all, they're one of the workers resigned, and the other one they seem to be in the process of firing, but they have to go through a civil service process. They suspended that person. The other thing they say they're doing is they're getting protocols in place to deal with energy in a smoother way. But that's a whole other
Because
issue.
they didn't find out about the power outage either for
Exactly.
4
I think
hours.
the fact that you have a new executive who's not from here, who wasn't part of the establishment, makes it easier to make change.
Right, and he came from Milwaukee, and people think very highly of him. They're hoping that give him a chance to make some changes.
Okay, interesting story. All
Yeah.
right, thanks a lot, David. Back over to Richard right now. Real estate, million-dollar properties are in Orleans Parish are staying on the market a bit longer.
Well, for all the talk about New Orleans' red-hot residential real estate market in the last few years, I mean, even just in the beginning half of this year, it was up almost 9%, more than 25% in the last 5 years. One area of the market that's really starting to show signs of softening is million-dollar-plus homes. And what we've seen is in September, there were more than 200 million-dollar-plus homes for sale in Orleans Parish, which is up almost 70% from 5 years ago. And part of this is due to different factors, inflation, and just as these homes that maybe before were below that $1 million mark, with their prices increasing everywhere else, those are now able to break through that threshold.
So, like, what numbers are we talking about now? How many million-dollar properties do we see now in the parish of Orleans as opposed to some years back, a few years back or whatever?
Well, in September, there were about 200, which is almost 70% more than what we would have seen 5 years ago. And as a result, it's really, for buyers of this market class in this area, it's really their market right now. I mean, these homes are staying on the market in Orleans. There's about a 25-month inventory, which is significantly higher than what we've seen in the past.
So the square footage, price per square foot, has been increasingly going up, right? And so that's why we're seeing these properties that maybe before would have been somewhere between $500,000, $800,000, $900,000 now hitting the $1 million mark. So what are buyers doing? Are there realtors saying that they're starting to see sellers lower their prices to try to get it off the market, or are people just waiting it out?
That's what it seems to be. I spoke with a property owner who had a beautiful still has a beautiful 160-year-old home right off a block from St. Charles, and he's had to lower his price down by about $200,000, which he bought the house for $600,000. He put about $600,000 of work into it and expected to make about $200,000. And now, as a result, after sitting on the market for so long, he's had to take it down to about cost.
So is it anticipated that in the springtime maybe this market will harden a little bit again?
That's part of the thought. I mean, the spring is always a better time for sellers than what we're seeing in September. And so I think at that point, real estate agents are hoping to kind of see some bounce back and start to see it normalize a little bit. But just the glut of homes on the market at that level is undeniable that it's going to continue to some extent.
Are agents starting to see folks maybe looking outside of Orleans Parish instead?
And that's what we've been seeing at all price points really for the last few years as prices have increased across the market. You know, areas like St. Tammany where you can get more property for less money, even in St. Bernard, which is just kind of not that far from the quarter anyway.
Right.
It's starting to get another look.
Is the perception of crime an issue?
I think so. That's what realtors have said. Also, just issues with infrastructure. All the talk about the Sewerage and Water Board after the August floods a few years ago. I think that also prompted people to start taking a look elsewhere.
All right. Thanks a lot, Richard. Over to Errol right now. And Jefferson Parish parades, well, some of them, not all of them, though, but there is a new route that they can follow.
Yeah, the Jefferson Parish Carnival parade scene has had difficulties the last few years, that the crowds have declined, and actually the quality of the parades have declined. I think even parish government recognized that. They've tried to their credit, they've tried to have more quality control, better parades with more original floats and more bands. But this is a big change, and Councilmember Jennifer Van Vranken, whose district includes the whole Metairie area, working with some of the crew captains, was working on this idea. And I guess the most important change is this, that most parades have traditionally started around Clearview and then going down Veterans towards Bonneville. The problem was that by the time they got to the Bonneville area, which is where your neighborhoods are, it's been late. And it's been hard for the crowds, it's been hard for the families to be out. And so the idea is, let's go in a different direction. Let's start it around Bonneville, and so the parades will be starting early, and then go down to Clearview. And then at Clearview, around where the Sears parking lot is they'll have some kind of a stage where a couple of nights they use for the family gras thing, which by the way means fat family. Okay, but they can do it for other celebrations. too. And so it makes sense in that sense of incorporating the the early parades. Now, a couple of crews say they don't want to do it. Argus, which parades in Mardi Gras. And it's less of an issue for Mardi Gras because that's a day, for Argus, because that's a daytime parade. And so there's no staying up late issue. But it's an interesting idea. It makes the parade route a little shorter, and it cuts down on some expenses also.
So how are businesses reacting to this? I mean, having people out there going to parades impacts businesses. They're good with it? They're bad with it? What are we hearing? Do we know?
Well, I think if you start a business in that area, you just have to accept it. And so if it moves the parades quicker, I think it's better.
All right. So we'll see. It does sound like a better idea to begin it at Bonneville. That is really a legitimate issue of trying to get your kids
on paper, at
to.
least, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it definitely does. And if I can recall, I think years and years ago, it used to follow that route.
Yeah. Well, years and years ago.
Ending at Clearview and starting,
years and years ago, some of them
closer
used
to
to
the
go down Metairie Road.
Oh, yeah.
There used to be a more just as in New Orleans, you used to have more parades on Canal Street, and you had some parades in Gentilly, and finally they streamlined it all into St. Charles Avenue. Jefferson has done the same thing, pretty much streamlining everything
making
onto veterans.
their route. All right, time to look ahead.
Tomorrow's Election Day, and all of you, if you live in Louisiana, regardless of where you live, will have the Secretary of State's runoff. Depending on your parish, in Jefferson Parish, there's 3 school board runoffs. In Orleans Parish, there's a judicial runoff, and in other parishes, there's miscellaneous runoffs. I promise you one thing, you will not have to stand in a long line.
Probably you're right on that, unfortunately. Richard.
Well, looking ahead, next week is bittersweet for me. Friday is my last day at the Advocate, and I'm going to be moving to France in January to go back to school. And David, I've been working on my French. You want to hear a little bit?
Yeah.
But I've really enjoyed my 5 years at the Advocate, and I enjoyed my time at the Picayune before that, when it was still a daily newspaper. And I appreciate you inviting me into your home tonight and all of these other Friday nights.
Isn't he just so gracious? Well, we're definitely going to miss you, even though you are a Tom Brady fan. Yeah.
Can everybody watching go to your home in Paris when you get there?
What's that?
Can everybody watching go to your home in Paris?
My dorm will be about the size of this desk.
You get more Maurice Chevalier impersonations.
Best of luck to you, Richard. Really, it's
I'm going to
exciting.
miss working with Richard. He and I have teamed up on some investigations over the years, so good luck with that.
Good reporter. You're not getting out of journalism, though.
Nope, I'll still be staying in it.
Okay, that's a good thing. All right, David.
Well, who can follow that?
I know.
Well, the Down the
can.
Drain team is sticking with the Sewerage and Water Board.
Mm-hmm.
We've uncovered some things about $21 million in unlikely accounts that weren't collected. And one of those guys that didn't do his job allegedly was a 31-year veteran. So we'll have more.
Okay, good. Important information for the community to know. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Best of luck to you, Richard.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.